So the U.S. State Department has released its draft environmental impact statement, basically straddling the line, as it were, for reaction to the supplemental environmental impact statement on the Keystone XL Pipeline. We're going to Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall. He joins us from Swift Current, Saskatchewan. Mr. Wall, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for the time.
Give us a sense as to your response to this very short document where were we really even expecting an additional 45-day comment period?
I think we thought this would not be resolved until later this year, or even into the summer. We were hearing that as well. And, I think we should be cautiously optimistic about Keystone's chances now, although this is a final decision to be made by the administration, and there's a lot of work left to do. But, the State Department, from an environmental standpoint, effectively signed off, or at least highlighted no real concerns on the project prior to it being stopped in the first place. And when the Nebraska aquifer situation was still in play, that rerouting has now occurred, and now Nebraska is on side. And so I don't think it's a surprise that there aren't any particular environmental red flags that the State Department is highlighting. I think it's interesting, the point that you noted in the report where they say, look, whether this thing happens or not, it won't necessarily affect the rate of growth in the development of the oil sands. And what's still missing, though, is the truth that up to 15% of the oil in Keystone, if it's ever built at any given time, will be American light sweet crude from the Bakken Formation, which is not a small amount as well. But I think it's part of the reason why we need to continue to make our case on this state side. And I'll be heading to Washington for what looks like a pretty good program. We hope a meeting with the right people to try to make the case that, look, this makes sense from an economic standpoint, but also look at what Saskatchewan, Alberta, and industry is trying to do, albeit imperfect, but working hard to do, investing in CO2 mitigation technologies. And I think it's very important now we take the comment period to make the case for this.
The fact that the comment period, even though it is 45 days, only has one in-person public opportunity for people to speak, and it'll be in Nebraska, and we don't know specifically where. Does it suggest to you that even though we have to read between the lines, that a decision's been made?
No, I don't think so. I don't think the decision's been made. I do think this is there's reason for some cautious optimism in this weigh-in from the State Department, even when and how this piece has been released. But I don't think we should be complacent. And, I think we have the industry and Canadians in general have made the economic case, the 20,000 jobs stateside, the impact on GDP, the fiscal impact. We know what it'll do for us, even in Saskatchewan, without any of our oil in the pipeline. It means, with a differential eliminated, $300 million more in revenue and $2.5 billion for industry. That's the economic argument. Now is the chance for us to make the environmental pitch here, not a pitch, but the case. America has a problem with coal, as does our province, about 40% reliant on their side, and we rely a lot on coal for electricity here. That's why we're investing in the world's largest clean coal project that's coming in on time and on budget and is about a 95% capture. We need to take those investments and that record stateside and say, look, when you're dealing with Canada, you're dealing with a country with an economy that does take the issue seriously, that's investing a lot of money from the public and private sector, and maybe we ought to share these technologies and help them deal with coal, which is a lot bigger CO2 problem there than any pipeline or than oil.
As you go there on Tuesday to speak about Canada's environmental record, talk to me about the impact assessment that we aren't really going to see Canada's development of the oil sands impacted either way by having a pipeline. That if the pipeline was approved, that it wouldn't lead to a massive explosion of action in the oil sands. We'd be doing that anyway.
I think that's a very important point to make when you're there. You're right, and we will certainly, because we won't be making it without the support, the supporting testimony, if you will, of the State Department, which have said as much today. But more importantly, I think we need to say, look, here's what we're doing north of the border. Here's the first jurisdiction in North America, to have a price on carbon was Alberta. We're modeling our own greenhouse gas legislation after them, and I'm not sure any of us have done a good enough job of telling that part of the story. That might give a bit more comfort, a bit more field space, if you will, for the White House to make a decision in favor of Keystone if we're dealing more on the environmental side, where most of the opposition lining up. On the economic side, there's both support right and left on the spectrum down there because, of course, trade unions have weighed in favor of Keystone. But on the environmental side, that's where we should be focusing now.
Well, tell me then about this, because you can't take one position on any subject without understanding the weakest links associated with that argument and what the opposition might be arguing as an alternative here. If we do have the State Department basically saying, listen, Canada's going to do what it wants with its oil sands, regardless as to whether or not this gets built, what do you think that the environmental groups who are opposing this are going to focus on based upon this report?
Well, I think their focus won't change. I think there is a lot of misinformation out there in terms of, well, the pipeline itself, as I mentioned, I've never heard anyone acknowledge the fact that 15%, 12, 15, 17% of the oil in this pipeline to be built is actually from the back, and it's about light sweet crude. I have not heard them acknowledge the fact that Alberta as a province and their industry and the Canadian federal government and our provincial government when it comes to coal are spending more per capita to try to deal with the CO2 issue around energy than any place in the Union on the south of the border, or certainly we're spending more from a public standpoint, doing more on the issue than any other country from which America purchases oil. So I'm not sure their story will change, but we need to continue to speak to the majority of support that exists in the U.S., but also give that administration the environmental room to be comfortable and approve Keystone. And there's a large coal-fired plant in Georgia, a very, very large plant, whose CO2 footprint approximates the size of the CO2 amount coming out of large parts of the oil sands. Well, we're working on clean coal, so let's make that case. Let's highlight, for the environmental groups down there, this is a problem you have. We share it to a lesser degree, but we share it, and we have some ideas on how to help.
As far as the economic impact to this, the jobs that will be generated have largely been touted as a big reason to approve the deal, with the State Department saying about 42,100 jobs will be generated over the construction phase of 2 years, yet only a handful, less than 50 or so full-time, long-term jobs will be created by this. How do you go about selling that angle?
I think a country that's looking at sort of the prognosis from an economic standpoint as America is, would be interested in 40,000 construction jobs, and would be interested just also in the trade relationship, because it's one pipeline, but it's a part of a larger trade relationship. It's about the economic integration of this continent that creates jobs, a lot of them on both sides of the border, and so there's more at stake from a commerce standpoint than just construction jobs here. And even if it were only that, it's 40-some thousand in an economy that I think could use those jobs. Most economies around in the world wouldn't sneeze at 42,000 construction jobs over 2 years, and then whatever can happen subsequent to that.
Premier, we appreciate your time, and while you're there in Swift Current, be sure to check out the Lyric Theatre. I understand the open mic night is something to check out.
Well played, sir. My son plays down at the Lyric on a regular basis on open mic night, but thanks for the shout-out. They'll love it.
The Saskatchewan Premier Brad Wall joining us on the line from Swift Current, Saskatchewan. And we will be speaking again with the Premier on Tuesday. His trip is to Washington. He'll be making the case for Keystone XL on behalf of Canada. He will join us from the capital city on that time.